on me. Nobody in this game actually reacts to things. Like, being genuine, nobody reacts to anything. If you're reacting to a signature, then that signature is actually just bad.
Dodge up. Dodge down. I know where he's gonna dodge, bro. I know. I just know. I just know.
The reason why these players were able to hit these clips you're seeing right now in official tournaments isn't because of luck, it wasn't because of reaction, it wasn't because of like genetics, or some people may say they're just built different. Nah, bro. These players literally know what's the exact thought you're having. They're literally inside your head and they know exactly what you're going to do and when you're gonna do it. Brawlhalla is like fucking chess to them, you know what I'm saying? And I give you my word, if you watch this guide till the end and practice the thing that I'm about to teach you right now, you'll be able to know exactly where your opponent is gonna be in the map, what they will do, what attack option they will choose, and what's the movement option they will go for the most, and much more. Just before we go, I hate saying this, but it's the game of YouTube. Like and subscribe, all that bullshit, you know what I'm saying? So with that being said, let's jump into it. Let's start off by identifying the core fundamental of reading your opponent before we go into the more specifics. Because if you don't have this aspect, then honestly forget about the rest of the video, which is your presence and focus when fighting someone. In order for you to read your opponent, you will have to take note of their actions, adapt and change your options accordingly, and finally have a purpose behind every attack you throw out and every movement option you choose. Which means if you are playing the game on autopilot, then none of the things that I'm about to teach you will be achievable. So that's the first thing you need to work on, because the only difference between high and low elo players is that high elo players didn't get there by luck, you know. They actually think and use their brain before throwing out any option. So you need to start doing the same thing. And this is where the tricky part is, because when you try this for the first couple of times, so you try to focus up, yeah, and have reasons behind your attacks and stuff for the first time, you will lose. You will inevitably lose your games because you've never played the game like this before, and it's somewhat difficult to do, honestly. But here's the thing you gotta understand about improving. Sometimes you have to get worse in order for yourself to get better. Like, that's how it goes. You're gonna have to try new things, and those new things will not be achievable from the first time you're doing it, you know. Now, this topic of focus is really a huge one, and I cannot really cover it in a small section like this. So I'm planning on making a full guide in the future about focus, and also another one about neutral play and the fundamentals of the game in general. So when those videos comes out, I'll have a card pop up on screen right now, so make sure to check them out. But until then, you have to work on your focus and presence when fighting someone. Okay, so once you've improved your ability to focus up, move and attack with purpose, it's time to tell you what exactly you should be doing in game. First thing first is collecting information about your opponent. An average Brawlhalla game is around 3 minutes long, which means it's about 1 minute for each stock, and your goal for the first minute or the first stock is to collect as many informations and mistakes about the opponent as much as possible. If you know one thing about your opponent, be it a movement habit or an attack habit that he's doing over and over again, and you punish it, then your chance of winning the game is already increased by quite a lot. If you know 2 or 3 habits that your opponent is repeating 1,000,000 times a game, then your chance of winning is pretty much guaranteed if you punish it. Because in any elo that is below 2300, players do not adapt mid-game. They maybe adapt the game after that, but not during the game, you know. And even 2300 players, honestly, not all of them have the ability to adapt that fast. Like, a lot of them make a mistake, they get hit or lose a stock for it, and still do it the stock right after. I would say the people who are constantly adapting to the opponent's options are usually 2400 and above, honestly, because this is where it gets cutthroat, where every player in this elo is barely making any mistakes and pretty much all of them are doing the right things. And it's here where you have to catch up to your opponent's entire playstyle and mistakes within like less than 2 minutes. But for now, up until you get that high, your goal in the first stock is to collect informations about your opponent, and we will go over what to focus on and the things you need to identify. However, this is way easier said than done. Like, collecting 1 or 2 information about your opponent is not an easy task at all, let alone actually punishing it. So it does take a lot of practice and time to be able to see through your opponent playstyle. Now, with that being said, these are the things you should look for when fighting someone. Starting off with your opponent's stage positioning. When you go in game, this should be your priority. Every single player have their favorite spot in the map. For example, it's the edge for a lot of players because this is the furthest you can get away from someone, and kind of like the safest place to go for. The reason to why I say quote unquote the safest, because it can be a safe place to go for if your opponent is shit at the game, honestly. If you're someone who complain about players going to the edge and you can't beat that, literally this is all you need to do. Just position yourself in center stage and let them go there, because when someone is at the edge of the map, they have nowhere to go, unlike you who will have the entire stage behind him and you can escape all of their attacks. However, it's the other way around for them, where now if they want to run away even more, they will end up in the off stage, which is even worse, you know. So just wait a couple of seconds for them to go to the edge, because you've been keeping an eye on them and now you know they are going to end up in this spot. So prepare yourself to attack this area of the stage, and by the time your opponent get there, your attack will be already hitting them, because you saw it coming before it even happens. And this is applicable for any position in the map, whether it's the edge, a platform, maybe jumping in the air and then landing in a specific spot, because some players literally be jumping a lot and then they land at the exact same spot every single time. Or maybe it's the other way around, where they land in different places but they jump in the same area all the time. And so for this section of the video, you need to know what's your opponent's favorite spot, and then position yourself a little bit away from that spot and prepare yourself to throw your hitboxes in there, because most of the time your opponent have only one escape strategy, and your first goal should be knowing what it is. Next up on the list is your opponent's reaction to attacks. Here you need to know what will your opponent do after getting hit, and there are 4 possibilities that branch out afterwards: a wake up attack, dodge, jump, or fast falls. Let's start off with the easiest one to punish, which is wake ups. If your opponent is constantly waking up after your attacks, you have 2 options. Either keep attacking because they're gonna be in stun frame from the previous attack, which means your next attack have priority and you'll be the one hitting them, not the other way around. But usually you'll need to switch to the second option once your opponent is a little bit damaged and your attack starts sending them a little bit far away from you. So the second option is both reading and reacting at the same time, where you attack, wait a little bit for their wake up, and see if you can punish or not. Now the second possibility is dodging. This is an interesting one because your opponent dodge is heavily linked to their playstyle. So if you can tell what's your opponent's playstyle at the start, you will most likely be able to predict their dodge direction. For example, most passive players will dodge away pretty much all the time because that's just their playstyle, you know. That's how they play the game. Their entire goal is just running away, and then attacking is their second priority. After all, it's called passive for a reason, you know. But keep in mind that most people have different dodges for different attacks. So like we said earlier, collect information during the first talk. Is your opponent dodging the same way every time for every attack, or is it specific dodges for specific attacks? And the main attacks you want to use to hit your opponent during the first talk are your options in neutral, because you're going to be using them the most throughout the entire match. By the way, if you don't know what's your weapons option in neutral, I will be explaining that in the neutral guide, so make sure to subscribe if you want to see that in the future. But really quick, your option in neutral is the safest move with the highest reward. So think about what's the safest move for your weapon and also the one that gives you the highest reward. So with that being said, now you need to know which direction your opponent preferred dodging to after getting hit with your weapons attacks in neutral. So for example, me, I play axe, so I have to hit my opponent with at least 3 dares and 3 inlights and maybe some delights as well before the end of the first stock, because those are the moves I will use the most in neutral with axe. And the same thing with my blasters. I have to hit them with a side light and dare at least 3 to 5 times and identify where are they dodging, or if they're dodging at all, or where do they end up after getting hit with that move. Next is jumps and fast falls. When you catch someone's dodge, they still have ways to escape your strings if it's 3 frames or higher, which is either through fast falling out of the attacks or jumping out. So you need to read that as well after catching the dodge. Now of course I can't be going over every attack for every weapon for every situation because that would literally take forever, but I can tell you how to predict your opponent and give you an idea of what they will do or where they will end up, and then it's up to you to adapt and find the right attack for the right situation. Next up is your opponent's resources management. Some players like jumping once before touching the ground, others prefer 2 jumps and then touch the floor, and some of them straight up double jump, dodge and recover, or double jump, dodge and then touch the floor. you have to keep an eye on your opponent's resources and when do they actually touch the ground. So look carefully at the jump colors to see if it's the first or second jumps, and also pay close attention if they are sweating or not. Not only that, but you also need to take notes if they throw their weapon at you when they have no options left, because that's a good options to go for when you have nothing left. However, if you can manage to dodge the weapon throw, you can get a lot of free kills because it's very unexpected. This also go hand in hand with the offstage. When your opponent gets sent far away, look closely to see if he recovers high or low, what options he uses first. Does he burn the dodge or not? Because most likely people have the same patterns when recovering back to stage, which means if you just can see through them, your chance of winning is increased by a ridiculous amount, because you'll be a step ahead and you know exactly where they will end up. All you have to do is just act on it the right way, which comes with just a little bit of practice and time, you know. Now let's talk about reading your opponent's adaptation, or should I say conditioning your opponent, which is some next level shit. This is where it actually gets very interesting and fun as hell. This is very useful when you are 100% sure of one habit that your opponent is repeating over and over. So for example, your opponent always double jump before touching the floor, like he's always double jumping 100% of the time. So here, if you hit them with axe delight, for example, 3 or 4 times in a row, they will inevitably change what they're doing. This works every single time, because whether your opponent is on autopilot or not, they will wonder what's going on and try to change something as fast as possible after getting hit by the same move 4 times in a row, you know. And this is exactly what you're reading here. Here on the example I gave with the opponent jumping, you are not reading the jumps, you are punishing the jumps and reading what they're going to do after getting punished for the jumps, which is in this case the landing. So you prepare yourself to hit them with a sidelight, for example, because you know that you've conditioned them to stop jumping, which means the next thing they're gonna try to do is the opposite of that, which is landing. So as you are hitting them with delights, you should already prepare yourself mentally to do a sidelight, because it's pretty much guaranteed if you do this process the right way. This can be a very complicated topic, but in general, if your opponent is jumping a lot, you can do this. If your opponent is always in the floor and you attack them with the same grounded move, they will start jumping, and this is where you do aerial attacks. That's the simplest way to put it out. This can get very advanced, where you don't just read the jumps and the landings, you start reading extra things, but I will not go over that right now. I'll maybe make a video about it in the future. And the next tip here isn't really about reading, but it's about knowing when to read and when to not read, or simply hiding your intentions. Because let's say you've collected an information about your opponent and you've abused that information quite a lot, to the point where you've taken 1 or 2 stocks from them just because of that. Here, most likely they will stop doing it in that last stock because you've hit them way too much. But honestly, for some players, no matter how much you punish them, they will keep doing the same shit. But those are not the ones we're talking about here. The question here is that, what should you do if your opponent catch up to you and actually stop doing the same mistakes you were holding on to and punishing them for it? Here is where you go back to the first point. You simply need to collect 2 or 3 things they're doing wrong, or like 2 or 3 habits they're doing repeatedly, because there are some habits where you don't want to risk your opponent getting adapted to you punishing them, if that makes sense, because they are somewhat valuable. Let me give you an example. Let's say your opponent gravity cancel a lot. You don't want your opponent to stop doing that, right? Because it's very valuable for you. Like, you can get 1,000,000 damage on just that information alone. I'm not saying that you shouldn't punish it at all, but what I'm saying is that you should let it slide sometimes, so that you can hide your intentions instead of making it obvious, so that you can actually get the maximum results out of it. Because if your opponent make a mistake and he doesn't get punished for it, the likelihood of him doing it again the next time will be much higher, and that's when you actually punish it, you know. Sometimes you may end up in a really bad position where, for example, you're 1 stock red and your opponent is still 1 stock yellow, and if he adapted to your reads, then it's here where the chance of you losing is quite high, you know. So make sure to alternate between 2 or 3 habits instead of punishing only one, and also use different ways to punish the same mistakes or one mistake, instead of always going for the same punish every time. Now, last but not least is reading your opponent's attacking rhythm. Just like how we said that your opponent have landing patterns and dodging patterns and jumping patterns, they also do have attacking patterns, which you need to know in order for you to be able to escape them, bait them into attacking, and also punishing them. So in this section, your goal is to see how does your opponent approach, or when do they approach you, or if they approach you at all, and then identify what's their favorite attacks to throw out, so that not only you can escape it, but you can also punish it later on. For some players, they attack as soon as you are close to them. Others attack with an attempt to punish your attacks, even if they are like way far away. Some players will approach with attacks instead of approaching with movements. Others double jump and then they land with an attack. I can't really give much details or explanation on how to exactly know the rhythm of your opponent's attacks, as it's something I'm also learning at the same time myself, but it will eventually come with time and enough practice. You really just need to observe very carefully your opponent's attacks and approaches, and then adapt accordingly. So that was it for this guide. It took me honestly quite a while to script, record and edit, so if you appreciate the hard work I'm putting in here for you, then subscribe and like and do all that YouTube shit. By the way, if you didn't know, if you click on share and then copy the link, YouTube will think that you've shared the video. You don't even need to send it to anyone. Just click on share and then copy link. That way it can actually support me a ton. So thank you so much for watching, and see you at the next one. Also guys, tell me in the comments, what kind of guides do you want to see? Like, what are you struggling with right now? What's the guide you want me to make for you? And I'll do my best to make the perfect guide for you. Alright, so enough talking. Take care, bro.